The alien warlords of the Zithari Dominion laughed when they saw the human fleet. It was barely a handful of ships, their hulls unimpressive, their size nothing compared to the dreadnoughts of the galactic empires. The Zithari, a species that prided itself on conquest, had expected more from the upstart race that had only recently entered the wider galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds, crushed species far older than humanity, and now they had their eyes set on Earth. Admiral Vorcal of the Zithari watched from the bridge of his massive command ship, the fury of 10 suns, as the human ships moved into formation. He scoffed. "This is what they send to fight us? A pathetic excuse for a fleet?" His officers chuckled, their mandibles clicking in amusement. "Perhaps their leaders have accepted their fate," one of his generals said. "Perhaps this is merely a ceremonial surrender." Vorcal considered that for a moment before shaking his head. No, humans were stubborn creatures. He had seen how they fought in smaller skirmishes, how they refused to bow even when the odds were against them. But this? This was not a fleet. This was barely a defense force. "Open a channel," Vorcal ordered. The screen flickered, revealing the image of a human officer. He was an older man, his uniform crisp, his expression unreadable. "This is Admiral Carter of the United Terran Defense Fleet," the man said. His voice was calm, almost casual, as if he were speaking to an equal, not a warlord who had brought a fleet large enough to reduce entire planets to rubble. "You're trespassing in Terran space. Turn back now, or we will engage." Vorcal let out a deep, guttural laugh. "You're in no position to make demands, human. Do you truly believe that this—" He gestured to the sensor readings of the human fleet. "Barely a dozen ships in total. Can stand against us?" Admiral Carter tilted his head slightly. "Do you know what the worst mistake an enemy can make is, Admiral Vorcal?" Vorcal smirked. "Enlighten me." "Underestimating humans." Before Vorcal could respond, his sensor officer let out a panicked, chittering noise. "Sir, energy spikes detected. The human fleet is—" The Zithari never finished his sentence. Space erupted with fire. The tiny human ships moved in ways that defied everything the Zithari knew about fleet warfare. They didn't follow traditional formations, didn't rely on predictable engagement patterns. They weaved through space like predators, like hunters. The first Zithari battleship exploded before they even had time to return fire. Then another, and another. Vorcal's amusement vanished. "How? What weaponry are they using?" His officers scrambled for answers, but none came. Human ships should have been weak, outgunned, and outnumbered. And yet, they moved with terrifying precision, each one acting as if it were part of a single mind, a perfect unit of destruction. Vorcal's screen flickered again. Admiral Carter was still there, calm as ever. "Like I said," he repeated, "you should have turned back." And then the human fleet unleashed hell. Vorcal's warship trembled as another Zithari cruiser exploded, torn apart by a weapon they didn't even see fire. His officers screamed over one another, trying to make sense of the slaughter unfolding before them. "Impossible!" one of his generals shouted. "Their weapons! How are they hitting us so precisely?" "How are they piercing our shields?" The Zithari fleet had been invincible in every battle before this. They had crushed the Graleth homeworld in a single day. They had annihilated the advanced fleets of the Varkos Dominion. No species had ever stood against them and survived. Yet here they were, being torn apart by a fleet that was supposedly too small to be a threat. "Reverse course!" Vorcal roared. "We need distance!" His fleet scrambled to pull back, their massive warships trying to break formation, but the humans didn't let them. The moment a ship moved, the humans were there, cutting off escape routes with deadly precision. "Sir, their ships—" The tactical screen flickered with new data. and what Vorcal saw sent a cold chill through him. The humans weren't just fighting well, they were anticipating every move his fleet made. He watched in horror as a human destroyer, a ship 1/5 the size of a Zythari battleship, cut through one of his warships like it was made of paper. Its weapons didn't fire in traditional bursts, but in continuous streams of energy, pinpointing weaknesses in the Zythari armor with an eerie accuracy. It was like the humans knew exactly where to strike. "Are they reading our frequencies?" a technician stammered. "No," Vorcal whispered, eyes narrowing. "This isn't just advanced targeting. This is something else." His mind raced, searching for an explanation. The humans had barely been in the galactic community for a century. They shouldn't have technology that could counter Zythari warships. Yet ship after ship fell, their wreckage drifting like burning corpses in the void. "Sir," a comms officer gasped, "our weapons aren't locking. Their ships are scrambling our targeting systems." "How?" "Unknown." It was a nightmare. Zythari weapons were the most sophisticated in the galaxy, designed to auto-adjust to enemy shielding and countermeasures. Yet, against the humans, they were useless. Their targeting failed, their missiles veered off course, their energy beams missed, and Zythari weapons never missed. Vorcal clenched his claws into the armrest of his command chair. "You!" he growled, opening a direct channel back to Admiral Carter. The human admiral looked calm, as if he were merely overseeing a training exercise. "Having trouble, Admiral Vorcal?" Vorcal bared his teeth. "This is impossible. What have you done? What trick is this?" Carter leaned back slightly. "No trick, just preparation. You see, Admiral, the thing about humans is, we don't fight fair." The transmission cut out. A second later, the human fleet vanished. Vorcal's eyes widened. "They're gone?" "No," one of his officers gasped, frantically scanning the battlefield. They've gone stealth." "That's not possible," Vorcal hissed. "No stealth system can function in an active battle." The Zythari flagship shook violently. A deep, rumbling explosion ripped through the lower decks. Emergency alarms screamed. Then came another impact. And another. The humans weren't gone. They were everywhere. Vorcal clutched his command chair as the fury of 10 suns trembled beneath another unseen attack. The bridge lights flickered, and the stench of burning metal filled the air. "Report!" he roared. One of his officers, mandibles clicking in panic, shrieked, We can't track them. They're striking from blind spots." Blind spots? There were no blind spots on a Zythari warship. Their sensor arrays covered every conceivable angle, their shields adjusted to incoming threats in real time. Their targeting systems were the best in the Dominion. And yet, against the humans, it was like they were fighting ghosts. "Override! Fire on my command!" Vorcal bellowed. "I don't care if you have to shoot blind, return fire!" The Zythari warships unleashed hell into the void, lighting up the blackness of space with plasma volleys, railgun slugs, and missiles. Their targeting systems were useless, but raw firepower had won them wars before. But not this time. The human ships reappeared, only for brief moments, just long enough to fire another brutal barrage before disappearing into the darkness again. They weren't just using stealth. They were manipulating the battlefield, controlling the rhythm of engagement in a way Vorcal had never seen before. "They're using tactical micro-jumps," an officer rasped. "Short-range FTL jumps within combat range." Vorcal's blood ran cold. No species used FTL jumps in active combat. It was suicide. Too many variables. Too much risk. A miscalculated jump could send a ship straight into a planet, a star, or worse, another ship. And yet the humans did it flawlessly. Vorcal watched in horror as a Zythari dreadnought twisted in space, its engines erupting into flames. A human frigate had jumped directly behind it, unloading a full payload of kinetic rounds into its exposed propulsion systems before disappearing again. Another Zithari battleship tried to pull back, only for a human cruiser to jump inside its formation, slicing through its flank like a blade through flesh. "They're dismantling us," whispered one of Vorkal's generals, like hunters taking apart their prey. The bridge shuddered again. Vorcal felt his grip tremble, not just from the impact, but from something he had never experienced before. Fear. Zithari did not fear. They were conquerors. They had subjugated countless worlds, crushed resistance with overwhelming force. Their empire was built on war, on the belief that no species was their equal. But these humans, they weren't fighting for survival. They weren't fighting for territory or glory. They were hunting, and the Zithari were the prey. A piercing alarm snapped Vorcal out of his trance. The holodisplay flickered, showing a new horror unfolding in real time. The humans had reached the fury of 10 suns. 2 of their warships, small, insignificant compared to his dreadnought, had jumped within spitting distance of his flagship. They moved with terrifying precision, their weapons pinpointing structural weak points with eerie accuracy. Then, a message flashed across the bridge. Incoming transmission from Admiral Carter. Vorcal hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to cut the transmission and fight to the last breath. But some part of him knew. The battle was over. "Put him through," he growled. The screen flickered, and there was Admiral Carter, still as calm as ever. Behind him, Vorcal could see the bridge of a human ship. No damage, no smoke, no chaos. The humans weren't just winning. They were untouched. Carter smiled. "So, Admiral, how's that invasion plan working out for you?" Vorcal bared his fangs. "What are you?" he snarled. "What kind of species fights like this?" Carter's expression didn't change. "We're human." Then the transmission cut, and the fury of 10 suns detonated. Vorkal's world dissolved into fire and silence. One moment, he was on his command deck, gripping his chair, staring into the calm, merciless eyes of Admiral Carter. The next, he was weightless, spinning in a void of debris, his body tossed like a broken doll as his flagship was torn apart from the inside out. Flames flickered in the shattered remains of the fury of 10 suns, its once mighty hull now a twisted graveyard of burning wreckage. Pieces of his crew, his officers, his war machine, all scattered, all meaningless. The Zithari had ruled the battlefield for centuries, their dominance unquestioned. But against humanity, their fleet had lasted less than an hour. Vorcal gasped, his body screaming in pain as his emergency survival suit fought to keep him alive. The autoseal had deployed in time, preserving his fragile atmosphere. But there was no ship left to save him. He was adrift in the wreckage, surrounded by the corpses of his empire's pride. And then, he saw them. The human ships moved through the battlefield like apex predators surveying their kill. Their formations were perfect, every ship positioned with eerie precision, their movements efficient and methodical. There was no gloating, no reckless celebration, just cold, calculating efficiency. Vorkal's vision blurred, his consciousness flickering as his oxygen reserves dwindled. His body ached, his mind reeled. This wasn't just a loss. This was an execution. A shadow loomed over him, a sleek, black warship, its hull unmarked, untouched by the battle. A human destroyer. He felt a pull as his suit's distress beacon was locked onto. They were picking him up. Humanity didn't just want to defeat him. They wanted him to see. Vorcal awoke in a dimly lit room. The air was thick with the sterile scent of machinery. His body was restrained, not cruelly, but securely. He wasn't a prisoner in chains, but a specimen being observed. A door hissed open. Admiral Carter stepped in, his uniform still pristine, his expression unreadable. Behind him, several human officers stood silently, watching, not with hatred, not with arrogance, with curiosity. Vorcal bared his fangs. "End it," he rasped. "Kill me and be done with it." Carter tilted his head. "Kill you?" He almost sounded amused. "You think that's why we saved you?" Vorcal snarled. "You slaughtered my fleet. You wiped us from the stars. Why keep me alive? To parade me as a trophy?" Carter took a step forward, his gaze sharp. "No, Admiral Vorcal. We kept you alive because we want you to remember." Vorcal froze. "We want you to return to your dominion," Carter continued. "We want you to look your High Council in the eye and tell them what happened here. Tell them what you saw. Tell them that humanity is not to be underestimated." Vorkal's breathing grew shallow. You think this will frighten us into peace?" Carter's eyes darkened. "No, Admiral. I think this will make them desperate." He leaned in, voice calm, steady, and filled with an unshakable certainty. "And that's when we'll break them." The Zithari Dominion would never be the same. The warlords who had once laughed at the small fleet now whispered in hushed tones of the horror Vorcal had brought back with him. Not of humanity's weapons, not of their ships, but of their mindset. Of a species that didn't fight for survival, but for dominance. A species that didn't conquer, but eradicated threats. The Zithari had mocked the human fleet. But now, as their empire trembled, as their warlords hesitated, as the fear of the unknown crept into their once proud hearts, they understood. Humanity wasn't just another race in the galaxy. They were the apex predators of war. The High Council of the Zithari Dominion was silent as Vorcal finished his report. The great warlords, the supreme strategists, the rulers of 1,000 conquered worlds, all sat frozen in their seats, their mandibles twitching, their bodies stiff with barely concealed fear. The chamber, carved from black obsidian, had never known silence before. It was a place of power, of unchallenged rule. Here, conquests were planned. Here, species were condemned to extinction with the stroke of a pen. Here, the fate of entire civilizations was decided without hesitation. But today, hesitation ruled. Vorcal stood before them, his body gaunt from his time in human captivity. His scars, both physical and unseen, marked him as a warrior who had faced something beyond the understanding of his kind. His voice, once commanding, now carried the weight of a broken empire. "They did not fight like us," he said again, his voice a low rasp. "They did not fight like the Varkos, who relied on overwhelming numbers. They did not fight like the Gralith, who waged war through attrition. They did not fight like any species we have ever encountered." He looked each council member in the eye. "They hunted us, they studied us, and when they struck, it was with the precision of a species that kills to exterminate." High Chancellor Zithun, the oldest and most revered of their kind, leaned forward. His eyes, black and pitiless, regarded Vorcal with measured coldness. "And yet you survived." Vorkal's mandibles clicked in frustration. "Because they let me, because they wanted me to come back here and tell you." Zithun exhaled slowly. "And what, Admiral Vorcal, do you believe their true intentions are?" Vorcal clenched his fists. "They did not just want to win this battle, they wanted to send a message, and now I am here delivering it." Zithun sat back, his clawed fingers steepled. "And what is this message?" Vorcal stared at him, unblinking. "That humanity does not fight wars. They end them." The chamber erupted into chaos. Some warlords hissed in outrage, pounding their fists against the long stone table. Others whispered in hushed tones, their voices betraying unease. A few sat in stunned silence, their gazes distant, already seeing the future written in fire. One counselor, younger and more arrogant than the rest, stood abruptly. "We should strike now. The humans are few in number. Their technology, while formidable, is not without weakness. If we mobilize the full strength of the Dominion, we can crush them before they become a greater threat." Vorcal turned his weary eyes to the fool. "You still do not understand." The young counselor sneered. "Enlighten me, defeated one." Vorcal did not rise to the insult. Instead, he leaned forward, his voice like a blade. "We were not fighting humanity's full strength. That was only a handful of their ships, a scouting force, a test." He exhaled sharply. "And we failed that test." Silence fell once more. Zithun tapped his claws against the table, his gaze unreadable. "You claim they fight like no other. What then is their true strategy?" Vorkal's mandibles tightened. "They are patient." He looked around the chamber, ensuring every warlord met his gaze. "They do not seek to defeat us in a single war. They are learning us, studying us, and when they are ready, truly ready, they will not fight us with ships or soldiers." He took a deep breath. "They will dismantle us from within. They will sow fear. They will make us hesitate. And when the moment comes, we will defeat ourselves before they ever fire a shot." Zithun stared at him for a long moment. Then, the High Chancellor did something that had never been done in the history of the Dominion. He stood, and he bowed his head. "The Dominion," he said, his voice solemn, "must decide whether we wish to survive, or be remembered as another name in humanity's history of fallen enemies." The chamber remained silent. For the first time, the Zithari Dominion was not planning a war. They were planning how to avoid one. Days passed in uneasy silence. The Zithari Dominion, once so eager for conquest, now stood on the precipice of a decision that could alter its fate forever. The warlords, the strategists, the ruling elite. They all whispered among themselves, weighing their options, grasping for a way to reclaim the pride that humanity had shattered. Vorcal remained within the High Council chambers, summoned to give further testimony. They questioned him endlessly, dissecting every detail of the battle, of the human tactics, of their behavior. He answered each question with the same chilling truth. "You cannot defeat them as you have defeated others. If you attack, they will not simply retaliate, they will end you." And yet, some among the council still refused to believe. "We have more ships," one general argued, "more soldiers, more firepower. If we mobilize everything, we can—" Vorcal slammed his fist against the table. "You still do not understand?" His voice echoed through the chamber. "You could send 1,000 fleets and it would not matter. The humans will not fight you on your terms. They will fight you on theirs. And by the time you realize the war has begun, it will already be over." The warlords murmured, uneasy. Then, a deep voice cut through the tension. "Tell me, Admiral," High Chancellor Zithun said, his black eyes cold as the void. "If what you say is true, if humanity is as relentless as you claim, what is the solution?" Silence fell once more. Vorcal took a slow breath. He had spent restless nights thinking about this, turning it over in his mind, knowing that the wrong answer could doom his people. At last, he spoke. "The only way to survive," he said slowly, "is to convince humanity that we are not their enemy." Scoffing erupted from some of the warlords. "A dominion does not beg for peace," one spat. Vorkal's gaze sharpened. "You think this is begging? Number, this is strategy." He took a step forward, his voice lowering. "The humans respect strength, but not the kind we have used for centuries. They respect intelligence, resilience, and adaptation. If we show them that we can learn, that we are not a mindless empire of brutes, They may see us as something other than prey. Zithun studied him. And if they refuse? Vorkal's mandibles tightened. Then we die. A long pause. The High Chancellor's claws tapped against the stone table in thought. Then he spoke. Prepare an envoy. Gasps rippled through the chamber. The warlords glanced at one another in shock. Never before had the Zithari Dominion sent an envoy to an enemy. They did not negotiate. They conquered. But now they had no choice. The diplomatic ship carrying the Zithari envoy drifted into human-controlled space, broadcasting peaceful intent. They received no immediate response, no warning, no greeting, just silence. It was not until the ship reached the edges of a Terran defense station that they were finally hailed. "This is Fleet Command," a calm voice said over the comms. "State your purpose." The Zithari diplomat hesitated, then spoke the words that had never before left the lips of his kind. We seek an audience with humanity." There was a pause. Then, in the cold, unreadable voice of the human officer, came the reply, "Stand by." The transmission cut. And the Zithari, for the first time in their history, waited in fear for what came next. The Zithari diplomatic ship floated in eerie silence, its crew tense as they waited for a response. The humans had acknowledged their request, but had given no indication of what would happen next. Minutes passed. Then an hour. The void of space was vast and empty, yet the weight of unseen eyes pressed down on the Zithari crew. They knew they were being watched, scanned, analyzed. Humanity did not react in haste. They studied first. Inside the ship's dimly lit council chamber, the chief envoy, Lord Zalvok, paced restlessly. He was no soldier, yet the weight of his mission bore down on him as if he were leading an invasion force. "They are making us wait on purpose," one of his aides muttered. "Of course they are," Zalvok said, his voice tight. "This is a message. They want us to feel powerless before we even speak." His mandibles clicked in frustration. The Zithari Dominion had never before sent emissaries to negotiate. Their method of diplomacy had always been conquest. The idea that they were now at the mercy of another species was unthinkable. But here they were. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the human response came. "Docking coordinates transmitted. You will follow the path exactly as instructed. Any deviation will be considered an act of hostility. You will leave all weapons aboard your vessel. Non-compliance will result in termination." Zalvok stiffened. There was no room for negotiation in that message. No pleasantries. No attempt to make the Zithari feel welcome. Just a cold statement of control. The humans had already set the terms. The Zithari diplomats moved in absolute silence as they exited their ship, stepping into the vast docking bay of the Terran station. The chamber was enormous, its steel-gray walls towering over them. Bright white lights illuminated the space with an unnatural sterility, making it feel more like a laboratory than a diplomatic hall. A squad of human soldiers stood waiting, weapons holstered but present. They wore dark uniforms with armored plating, their expressions unreadable behind their visors. These were not mindless guards. They were warriors, watching every move with silent calculation. At the center of them stood him, Admiral Carter. Zalvok had heard the stories, had studied the reports from Vorcal. The human admiral was as much a weapon as any of their warships. His face was calm, composed, betraying no emotion. "You requested an audience," Carter said, his voice even. "We're listening." Zalvok hesitated. He had expected a grand hall, a formal negotiation table, the rituals of diplomacy that all galactic empires followed. Instead, the humans treated this as if they were merely allowing an insect to speak before deciding whether or not to crush it. Swallowing his pride, Zalvok stepped forward. "The Zithari Dominion," he began. Carter cut him off. "We already know who you are. Get to the point." Zalvok's mandibles twitched, but he forced himself to remain calm. "We come to propose a truce." For a moment there was silence. Then Carter let out a slow breath, his eyes locking onto Zalvok's with a piercing intensity. "A truce?" He repeated the word carefully, as if testing it. Zalvok nodded. "Yes. We acknowledge that we underestimated your people, that our aggression was, misguided." The words tasted bitter. "We wish to avoid further conflict. We seek an understanding between our species." Carter didn't react. He simply studied Zalvok for a long, excruciating moment. Then he turned slightly, glancing toward one of his officers. "Get me the list," Carter said. A woman in a Terran uniform handed him a data slate. Carter scanned it briefly before looking back at Zalvok. "Tell me something," Carter said, his voice suddenly colder. "Do you know how many civilizations have come to us with the same request?" Zalvok hesitated. I do not." 36, Carter said, tossing the data slate onto a nearby table. 36 empires, species, and warlords who once looked at us the same way you did, who saw us as weak, as insignificant, who thought humanity was just another obstacle to be crushed under their expansion. Zalvok remained silent. Carter took a step forward, his gaze never breaking. "Do you know how many of those 36 still exist?" The Zithari envoy swallowed hard. How many?" Carter leaned in slightly, his voice barely above a whisper. 4. Zalvok's blood ran cold. "That is the reality of what you face," Carter continued. "When we fight, we don't fight for land or glory. We don't fight for conquest. We fight to win. And when we win, we erase those who thought they could break us." The Zithari envoy tried to maintain his composure, but he felt small under Carter's gaze. "You want a truce?" Carter asked. "You want to avoid further conflict?" He scoffed. "Number, you want mercy." Zalvok opened his mouth to protest, but Carter wasn't finished. "Tell me, Lord Zalvok," the human admiral said, his tone like ice, "why should humanity spare the Zithari Dominion?" The envoy had no answer. For the first time in Zithari history, they had nothing to offer but their own survival. Zalvok had spent his life negotiating the terms of surrender from lesser species. He had seen once mighty civilizations grovel before the Zithari Dominion, begging for mercy. Now, for the first time in his existence, he was the one begging, and the humans weren't listening. Admiral Carter's gaze burned into him, demanding an answer that Zalvok did not have. Why should humanity spare the Zithari? He struggled for words, his mandibles clicking with barely concealed desperation. Because war between us would bring ruin to both sides." Carter didn't blink. "You don't believe that?" Zalvok hesitated. "You still think you have a chance," Carter said, his voice laced with quiet amusement. "You still believe that if you can just regroup, rebuild, strike first, maybe you can turn the tide." He leaned in. "You can't." Zalvok tensed, his pride warring with the cold truth. "The Dominion does not bow." Carter's lips curled into something that was almost a smile. "Oh, you will." The words sent a chill through Zalvok's bones. Carter turned to one of his officers. "Send the data." The officer pressed a few buttons on their wrist device. A moment later, Zalvok's wrist comm flickered to life. He hesitated, then looked down, and his blood ran cold. On the screen was a real-time scan of Zithari space. Human ships were already there, not attacking, not invading, simply watching, inside Dominion territory, undetected, until now. Zalvok's breath hitched. "That's impossible." Carter crossed his arms. You're not the first empire to underestimate our reach." Zalvok's mind reeled. The Dominion's defenses were supposed to be impenetrable. And yet here were Terran warships, deep in Zithari territory, before any official peace talks had even begun. The humans had already won. They could have struck first. They could have burned the Dominion's worlds to cinders, crippled their fleets before they ever saw the attack coming. But they hadn't. They had waited. Because this was never about war. It was about control. Carter let the silence stretch, watching as the weight of realization crashed down on Zalvok. Then he spoke. "Here's how this is going to work," he said, voice calm and measured. "You're going to take our terms back to your High Council. You're going to tell them exactly what you saw here today, and they're going to agree." Zalvok's mandibles clenched. "And if they don't?" Carter's smile didn't waver. "Then your species joins the other 32. The room felt cold. Zalvok wanted to argue, to find some loophole, some way to salvage the Dominion's pride. But there was nothing left to salvage. Humanity had made its decision. The Zithari Dominion would not be conquered. It would be owned. Zalvok bowed his head. "I will deliver your message." Carter stepped back, giving a small nod. "Good." He turned to his officers. "Escort them back to their ship." As Zalvok and his delegation were led away, he could feel the weight of unseen eyes upon him. Not just the humans in the room, but the thousands watching from the shadows. He had come seeking peace. He had found submission. And in his heart, he knew. The Dominion was no longer the master of the stars. Humanity was. The journey back to Zithari space was suffocating. Zalvok sat in his private chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel, staring at the data slate in his hands, the same one Admiral Carter had given him before they left. He had played the transmission over and over, as if trying to find some flaw, some weakness in humanity's plan. There was none. The humans had already won. They had infiltrated Zithari space before negotiations had even begun. They knew the Dominion's fleet movements, its supply lines, its vulnerabilities. And yet they hadn't struck. They had given Zalvok time to bring their demands back to the High Council. This wasn't diplomacy. This was a slow, methodical strangulation. He gripped the slate tighter, his mandibles twitching in frustration. How had this happened? The Zithari had ruled the stars for centuries, crushing civilizations under their heel. And now they were the ones being dictated to. A soft chime broke the silence. His aide entered, bowing low. "Lord Zalvok, we are approaching the capital world. The High Council awaits your report." Zalvok sighed, rising from his chair. "Then let us not keep them waiting." The High Council chamber was filled with tension as Zalvok stepped inside. The warlords and strategists stared at him, their expressions unreadable. Some were expectant, others skeptical, but most were uneasy. They had sent him to negotiate, but they had not expected him to return looking defeated. Zithun, the High Chancellor, observed him carefully. "Speak, Lord Zalvok. What has humanity offered?" Zalvok hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "It is not an offer, High Chancellor. It is an ultimatum." Murmurs spread through the chamber, but Zithun silenced them with a raised claw. "Explain." Zalvok exhaled and activated the data slate. The transmission from Admiral Carter played for all to see. It was brief, to the point, and undeniably terrifying. "The Dominion will cease all hostile expansion immediately. You will withdraw from contested territories and recognize Terran sovereignty over human-claimed worlds. In return, humanity will allow your species to exist. This is non-negotiable." The silence that followed was heavier than any battle Zalvok had ever witnessed. Finally, one of the warlords hissed, "This is madness. The humans expect us to surrender without a fight." Another slammed his fist on the table. "We still have our fleets, our armies. We do not yield to threats." Zalvok turned on them, his voice rising. "You think this is just a threat? Look at the second file." Zithun did. His expression remained neutral, but the others gasped as the data unfolded before them. Fleet positions, supply lines, communication hubs, all compromised. The humans were already inside their empire. They had the ability to cripple the Dominion without a single large-scale battle. Zalvok's voice was grim. "They do not need to invade. They do not need to fight. If we refuse their terms, they will dismantle us from the inside. Our fleets will never reach human space before our own supply lines collapse." A warlord stood, trembling with rage. "Then we strike first! If we are doomed, let us go down fighting!" Zalvok's eyes darkened. "That is exactly what they want. If we attack now, they will not respond with negotiations. They will erase us." The chamber fell into a deep, uneasy quiet. Finally, Zithun spoke. "Then we must decide. Do we fight and risk extinction? Or do we submit?" It was a question no Zithari had ever asked before. But humanity had forced them to ask it. The warlords argued, voices rising in fury, in fear, in denial. Some still clung to pride, unwilling to accept the reality before them. Others understood that this was no longer a battle of ships and soldiers. It was a battle of survival itself. Zithun let them speak for a time, then raised his claw once more. The chamber fell silent. His decision was already made. "Prepare the declaration," he said coldly. "The Dominion will accept humanity's terms." The words hung in the air like a funeral dirge. For the first time in its long and brutal history, the Zithari Dominion bowed to another power. Days later, the official announcement spread across the galaxy. The mighty Dominion, the empire that had once brought terror to countless species, had surrendered without a war. There was no treaty signing, no pomp, no ceremony, just a single transmission sent to humanity. "The Zithari Dominion acknowledges Terran supremacy. We will not oppose you." The response from Earth was equally brief. "Acknowledged." And just like that, it was over. The Zithari had mocked the small fleet. Now they would never dare mock humanity again.